Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into a story you think you know but don't. The name Medusa probably flashes images of snarling serpents, stone-eyed death, maybe even a triumphant hero swinging ahead by its writhing locks. But tonight, forget the myths you grew up with. Imagine instead a girl, just a girl, young, alive, breathing, and mortal. She walks barefoot on polished marble, her long dark hair trailing behind her like a river. She's quiet, devout, and far too beautiful for her own safety. You hear the hush of incense smoke curling through high arches. You feel the cold kiss of temple floors beneath your feet. You're in ancient Greece, now more precisely, in a sacred sanctuary of Athena, goddess of wisdom and war. And Medusa is not yet a monster, not yet a cautionary tale. She's just one of many priestesses who have sworn a vow to remain chaste and pure because to serve Athena is to serve her body, her mind, and nothing else. But there's something unsettling in the way the temple guards look at her. Something ... possessive. She's mortal, and mortals are fragile things in a world where gods get bored. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You watch Medusa kneel in prayer, her forehead pressed against the cool stone. She's earnest, not just following ritual, but meaning every whispered word. She's the kind of person who gives everything to what she believes in, even when belief offers little in return. She keeps her head down, her gaze low, her steps small. In a world where men rule and gods intervene without warning, discretion is survival. Outside the temple, Athens bustles. Philosophers argue in shaded courtyards. Merchants shout over ripe figs and salted fish. Somewhere, Socrates is annoying someone with too many questions. But here in the temple, there's silence, heavy and sacred. You can feel the eyes of statues watching, their marble brows furrowed in permanent judgment. Medusa is what people used to call too pretty for her own good. That kind of beauty, the kind that makes people stare too long, was considered dangerous, offensive to gods, an accident waiting to happen. And in Greek myth, accidents usually come with lightning bolts or monstrous consequences. You can almost hear the gossip outside the temple walls. Did you see her? She's just a mortal, and she looks like that. The gods won't like it. Because here's the thing no one says out loud in this polite, pious world. The gods are jealous, and they don't like competition. Historians still argue whether the tale of Medusa was ever rooted in a real person, or whether she was always meant to symbolize a kind of cautionary tale, warning women what happens when they too noticeable. But what most of those marble bust scholars forget is how very human the beginning of this story feels. You watch Medusa carry water jugs twice her weight. You see her scrape wax from the candelabras by hand, her fingers raw and red. You notice how the other priestesses give her space not out of reverence, but out of fear. Beauty like hers could draw the wrong kind of attention. And in ancient Greece, the wrong kind of attention often ended in tragedy. Here's a fringe tidbit you won't find in your high school mythology book. In earlier versions of the myth, Medusa wasn't always cursed. Some ancient pottery and poetry suggest she was once honored, perhaps even protected by Athena. Others say she was a Libyan serpent goddess whose tail was stolen, twisted, and folded into Greek legend over time, as if the Greeks took something powerful and feminine and made it tragic and just a little more manageable. Tonight, you're walking with her. You hear the rattle of the temple gates closing at dusk. You see the oil lamps flicker as shadows stretch long over columns carved with battle scenes. You feel the weight Medusa carries, not just of her chores, but of being watched, always watched. There's a strange irony, isn't there? A woman worshipping a goddess of wisdom and war, only to be ruined by the goddess's own lack of mercy. But that comes later. For now, it's just another evening, and Medusa, unaware of the storm forming around her, tucks her hair behind her ear and begins to clean the altar. You linger at the edge of the room. You want to warn her. You want to scream that she deserves better, but you can't. You're a ghost in time, watching something inevitable unfold. A low hum fills the room, whether from bees outside or tension inside. It's hard to say. You sense that something is shifting. The calm before the myth. The final breath before the scream. And Medusa, poor Medusa, just wipes the stone basin and sings softly to herself, trying to keep the silence from swallowing her. This is where the real story begins. You wake up the next morning with the soft, golden light of dawn spilling across the temple floor. The scent of olive oil and old stone lingers in the air. Birds chatter outside, oblivious to the divine politics at play. Medusa is already awake. Of course she is. She's kneeling again, lips moving silently in prayer. Her eyes closed, not out of peace but discipline. You wonder what she asks Athena for. Protection, strength, forgiveness, or simply another day without incident. You walk with her now, following barefoot steps that echo against the polished marble floors of Athena's temple. It's grand. In that way, temples often are designed less for comfort, more for awe. Fluted columns stretch like ribs into the sky. High ceilings murmur with trapped voices from centuries of prayers. The walls gleam, cleaned daily by girls like Medusa, who worship with their backs and hands more than their mouths. You run your fingers along one wall and feel it shimmer slightly, as though the devotion soaked into the very stone. Every inch is etched with scenes of Athena hurling spears, sprouting from Zeus's skull, fully armored, teaching mortals weaving and war. It's a space meant to inspire and intimidate. There's a tension here, you can feel it, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Maybe it's the silence, or the way the other priestesses glance nervously at Medusa and quickly look away. Maybe it's the priest who pauses a beat too long when handing her the offering bowls. Or maybe it's just knowing what's coming. Medusa walks these halls with a practiced grace. She knows the spots where the marble dips. She knows which torches sputter and which tapestries tend to collect dust too quickly. She's meticulous, not because she's afraid of reprimand, but because she believes. Still, even now, she believes in the order of things, in piety, in divine justice, and that's the most heartbreaking part. Mainstream historians often present Medusa's temple service as background noise, a prequel, a sentence before the real story begins. But here, now, walking beside her, you realize it was the story. This was her life. This was where she gave herself entirely. And it was here that the gods failed her. Now, for a quirky little detail, some lesser-known traditions claimed Medusa's hair wasn't originally snake-free. Some early Libyan cultures saw her as always part serpenta, being of transformation and rebirth, not punishment. Imagine that. Instead of a curse, the snakes were power. Of course, that idea didn't survive long in the Greek versions. Power, especially feminine power, needed to be tamed. You watch Medusa lighting oil lamps beneath a colossal statue of Athena. Its eyes, cold and clear, stare down at her. The irony is suffocating. She serves the very figure who will one day destroy her and Athena. Not a flicker of emotion in those stone-carved cheeks. As Medusa moves, you start to see the subtle shift. The way the priestesses whisper behind columns, the unease in their voices. Rumors have started. Some claim she's too beautiful, others that she brings bad omens. A few say she's caught the eye of someone far more dangerous than any mortal man, Poseidon. You remember him, don't you? God of the sea, Earthshaker, brother to Zeus, known for tempests and tridents and a short temper, also known for a history of pursuing mortal women with all the delicacy of a tidal wave crashing into a coastal village. If he wants something or someone, he takes it. And no temple, no vow, no goddess stands in his way. Historians still argue whether the temple Medusa served in was in Athens or in a more coastal city, perhaps even deep in Libya, where the Gorgon myths may have originated. But wherever it stood, one thing becomes certain. Poseidon has noticed her. Medusa doesn't know yet. She goes about her duties with the same quiet diligence. But the air is changing. The way people look at her is changing. You feel it, as if the very floor beneath you is beginning to hum a distant warning. She pauses at the edge of the temple's courtyard. The sun has fully risen now, casting golden lines across her shoulders. You watch her face tilt toward the light, just for a moment, eyes closed. Not a woman cursed or feared, just a girl, breathing. There's a sound, a low rumble. At first, you think it's thunder. Then you realize it's laughter, not cruel, not mocking, just too loud, too sure. Somewhere nearby, Poseidon is close, but she doesn't hear it yet, not truly, not the way you do. You pass by the columns as a breeze picks up, stirring dust and petals across the floor. There's a statue of Athena here, tall and eternal. But tonight, something about her feels colder, distant. You want her to speak up, to intervene, but she won't. She never does. You walk back inside with Medusa. She takes a deep breath. You do too, because something's coming, and no prayer will stop it. You trail Medusa through the city, now, stepping beyond the temple gates into the heartbeat of ancient Athens. The stone streets are worn smooth by centuries of sandals, chariots, and dust. Morning light glints off bronze helmets and ceramic pots. Smells collide in the breeze, roasting lamb, warm bread, sweat, and sea salt. But this isn't your postcard version of Athens, with heroic philosophers and perfect democracy. No, this city is alive, loud, and let's be honest, kind of grimy. People notice Medusa. They always do. As she walks past the agora, the open marketplace, conversations pause. She keeps her eyes low, posture straight, but the stares follow her like shadows. Men glance, then stare longer than they should. Women tighten their shawls or turn their children away. One merchant mutters something under his breath, too soft to hear, but the tone is sharp. You can see it clearly now. She is a spectacle, even when she tries to disappear. It's a hard thing, being beautiful in a world where beauty is seen as invitation. And in this world, that beauty is Medusa's curse long before Athena gets involved. No divine magic needed, just mortal hunger, and the kind of double standard that spans centuries. You pause in front of a mosaic. It depicts Athena standing tall, wise, and armored, flanked by olive trees and owl feathers. At her feet, mortals bow in reverence, but there's something disconcerting about the image. The power is clear, yes, but so is the distance. Athena doesn't offer comfort. She offers order, protection, maybe, if it suits her. Medusa enters a cloth vendor's stall to gather fabric for temple offerings. The woman behind the stall barely makes eye contact, sliding the requested cloth across the table without a word. You catch the subtle hesitation, the fear, like Medusa is already something other than human, already tainted. Here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In ancient Athens, women, especially unmarried ones, were expected to remain indoors, or at least out of sight. Modesty was virtue. Visibility was danger. Medusa, as a temple priestess, existed in a rare public role for a woman, but that visibility came with a cost. People watched, people judged, and when things went wrong, they blamed. You catch snippets of gossip, words like temptress and prideful, whispers that perhaps she thinks herself better than the others, that she walks with her chin a little too high. You and I know that not true. She walks the way anyone does when trying not to cry. Now here a quirky tidbit. Some fringe scholars argue that Medusa may have once been a real priestess of Athena, and her curse was a symbolic condemnation used by the temple itself to cover up an unspeakable act, a scapegoat in stone. They point to records of priestesses who disappeared from temple rolls without explanation, vanished, forgotten, buried under myth. You step out of the stall as Medusa makes her way back toward the temple, but something stops her. A shadow falls across the street, unnaturally dark. The breeze shifts direction. Her skin prickles. She's not alone. At first, you think it's just another passerby, some arrogant noble, or maybe a soldier too proud of his sandals. But then you see him, taller than the others, barefoot, damp footprints sizzling in the dust. He doesn't walk, he glides. His beard is tangled with seaweed, his eyes storm-colored, hungry. Ancient lock onto Medusa, like a hawk diving for prey. Poseidon, god of the sea, but also of earthquakes and horses and bad decisions. He's not subtle, never has been. He says nothing, just watches. Medusa, sensing something unnatural, turns toward the temple gates. Her pace quickens. She doesn't run, not yet, but you can tell her instincts are screaming. She doesn't look back. That would be dangerous. In Greek myth, looking back never ends well. The street seems to clear as if the city itself understands something divine is happening, or something horrible. Same difference. She steps into the temple courtyard, heart pounding, breath shallow. The gates groan as they close behind her. You pause, hand resting on the cool stone wall, watching as Poseidon lingers just outside, smiling, not kindly. Historians still debate whether what comes next was a physical act, a metaphor, or something layered in symbolism. But the fear, that's real. You feel it in your chest like a stone. You notice something else, too. Athena's statue, huge, looming over the courtyards, seems to have shifted slightly. Her gaze now falls directly upon Medusa, silent, judging, maybe even disappointed, but in who? Inside, Medusa begins preparing the evening offerings. Her hands tremble slightly, the cloth slipping through her fingers. The torches flicker, even though there's no wind. She's trying to pretend this day is normal. But you know better. You stand frozen in the torchlight, watching Medusa lay bundles of olive leaves at the foot of Athena's towering statue. She moves like she's underwater, now slower, heavier, as if each step costs her more than the last. The silence presses in on the temple walls, and even the faint chirp of cicadas outside has faded. Something's coming. You feel it, like a chill on the back of your neck, and she feels it too. Still, she doesn't speak, doesn't cry, doesn't ask for help. Who would she ask? The gods. You want to scream at her, run, hide, fight, but you can't. You're just here to witness. And history, as usual, is not kind. That afternoon, the sky clouds over too fast for comfort. The sun is swallowed by rolling storm clouds that gather out of nowhere. A priestess looks up from her duties and mutters, "Poseidon," not in awe, in dread. There are stories told quietly, behind closed doors, about what happens when gods take notice, about the price mortals pay for divine attention, especially women. Whether beautiful or bold, outspoken or silent, it rarely ends well. Back in the sanctuary, Medusa lights the final torch. Its flame flares high, unnaturally so, as if reacting to her fear. Her breath catches, and then a sound, faint at first, a wet, dragging slosh. You turn. He's here. Poseidon doesn't need permission. Gods rarely do. He crosses the threshold with all the reverence of a crashing wave. The water pools at his feet, soaking into the marble. His presence warps the air. Everything smells like salt and storms. You want to look away, but can't. His eyes are locked on Medusa, and his smile is ... wrong. The kind of smile that thinks power is charm. Medusa steps back, one hand instinctively brushing the altar, as if Athena herself might intercede. But she doesn't. You see the moment she realizes she's alone. And that's what makes this unbearable. The temple, the sacred space she's devoted her life to, will not protect her. The goddess she's served since childhood remains silent. There is no justice coming, no thunderous voice from the heavens to cry, "Stop," and Poseidon doesn't stop. We won't go into details. This is not that kind of story. But let it be known, what happens next is a violation, a desecration, and a betrayal. Not just of Medusa's body, but of everything she believed in. By the time the storm clears, the temple is a ruin of what it was. The marble is cracked, the offerings scattered, the torches have guttered out, and Medusa's shaking. Silence sits curled at the base of the statue, her robes torn, her faith shattered. You wait for Athena to appear. Surely now Noshi will step in, defend her servant, smite the sea god who desecrated her temple. But instead, Athena's statue remains cold and lifeless. Hours pass, no thunder, no fire, no fury, only silence. Here's a mainstream historical fact that will make your stomach churn. In ancient myth, gods who committed violence against mortals, especially women, were rarely punished. Zeus, Apollo, and Poseidon all share a long, grim resume of mortal victims. And while these stories were retold as divine romance or tragic fate, the truth is far less poetic. Medusa will not be celebrated. She will be blamed. She always is. The next morning, temple guards find her still sitting there. They recoil not in sympathy, but suspicion. One whispers that she defiled the temple. Another mutters that Athena will be furious, as if she's the one who invited disaster in. You follow her to the antechamber, where judgment waits, not from men, from a goddess. Athena finally appears, and you expect hope, maybe, that there will be some mercy, some flicker of divine justice. But Athena looks down at Medusa, not with pity, with disgust. She doesn't ask what happened, doesn't listen, doesn't care. Her verdict is swift, cold, final. You have brought shame to my temple, she says. You have broken your vow. The other priestesses avert their eyes. No one speaks. No one dares. Medusa tries to stand. Her voice breaks as she tries to explain. But Athena raises her hand, and that's when it happens. The transformation. Medusa gasps. Her hair ignites in agony, twisting into serpents that scream silently as they slither from her scalp. Her skin pales, hardens. Her eyes burn with something new, something dangerous. You step back, heart pounding. Even you can't hold her gaze now. This isn't justice. This is punishment disguised as power. Athena declares it a curse. Says Medusa will wander far from civilization, that anyone who dares look upon her will turn to stone. Not once does she mention Poseidon. Historians still debate why Athena punished Medusa. Some claim she acted out of jealousy. Others argue that it was a twisted form of protection to make Medusa untouchable. A few even defend the goddess, suggesting she was bound by divine law. But none of it matters now, because Medusa is no longer a priestess, no longer a woman. She is the monster they made her. You watch as she is cast out of the temple, her footsteps echoing like a death knell. The girl who once prayed so earnestly now walks into exile, with serpents for hair and a death sentence in her gaze. And no one follows, no one stops her, except you. Because now the real story begins. You trail her through the wilderness now, far from the marble columns and judgmental eyes of the city. The temple is gone. The name Medusa is no longer spoken with pity, but with fear. And yet she walks, broken, yes, cursed, maybe, but still alive. And with every step she takes, something inside her hardens. Not into stone, but into resolve. The land around her shifts. Olive groves give way to cliffs and bramble. Civilization fades behind jagged hills and dark pine forests. She doesn't speak, doesn't cry. Her footsteps are steady, even as the snakes on her head hiss and coil restlessly, confused by their own existence. Here, a mainstream historical fact that often glossed over. In many ancient Greek myths, exile was considered a fate worse than death. To be cast out, not just from home, but from memory, was the ultimate erasure. And that's exactly what Athena has done. She didn't just transform Medusa, she deleted her. But you still see her. You're still here. The terrain grows harsher. Volcanic rock beneath her feet. Wind that stings like nettles. There are no roads where she's going. Only whispered legends and ghost stories about a cursed woman with eyes like tombs. Every shepherd boy and wandering soldier has heard the tale by now. None of them knows the truth. You pass through a ravine littered with bones. Not human goat, mostly, and wolves. Medusa walks through without flinching. Creatures flee when she draws near, sensing something unnatural in her presence. Her snakes hiss at a vulture that dares to fly too low. It tumbles to the ground, a statue mid-wing. She doesn't even turn to look. Eventually, she finds it. A stretch of jagged cliffs rising from the sea like the teeth of a sleeping god. Waves crash endlessly below. There are caves carved into the stone by centuries of storms. And it's here at the very edge of the world that Medusa makes her home. She doesn't build a shrine, doesn't pray anymore. She carves out a hollow in the cliff wall, just big enough to sleep. And that's where she curls up that first night, alone, alive, watching the stars through slitted eyes that she dares not open too wide. Now for a fringe tidbit. Some versions of the myth say Medusa did not live entirely alone. They say her sisters, Cino and Euryale, joined her eventually. These two were immortal gorgons, born of primordial sea gods. In some stories, they rage and grieve with her, even defend her from intruders. But in others, Medusa remains the only mortal one, separate from her family, bearing the weight of divine cruelty alone. You sleep near her that first night, though she doesn't know you're there. The wind howls through the caves, and you dream of waves crashing in slow motion, of stone eyes and serpent lullabies. And when you wake, she's already moving, again tending to the cliffs as if they're a garden, clearing brush, carving paths, making a life out of ruins. But visitors come, eventually. They always do. You hear the first one before you see him, a rustle in the underbrush, a clumsy clatter of sandals on stone, a sword drawn too early. He's young, maybe 17, probably dared by someone braver or stupider. He inches forward, whispering the words of myths he doesn't understand. She waits. She always does. And then he sees her. Not her face, just the glint of her hair, the curve of her shoulder. He gasps, hesitates, and then, of course, he looks. You flinch as it happens, instantaneous, silent. He turns to stone, mouth frozen in surprise, sword still raised. Another statue for the cliffside, another warning. Medusa sighs. Not in triumph, in exhaustion. This is her life now. Not vengeance, not fury, just survival and solitude. Historians still argue whether Medusa's power was a gift or a curse. Some say Athena's magic was meant to empower her to ensure no man could hurt her again. Others argue it was an act of cruelty, a punishment cloaked in justification. Either way, the result is the same. Anyone who sees her dies, and she can never be touched, never held, never loved. You walk with her along the cliff, past the frozen figures of fallen warriors and curious fools, each one a cautionary tale, each one a silent misunderstanding. But you see something else too. Flowers, small white blooms growing between the statues. She tends them when no one is watching, waters them from a cracked shell she found near the sea. It's a tiny thing, but it means she hasn't let go of everything. The world has turned her into a monster. But monsters don't grow flowers. And you realize something else. She's not waiting to be rescued, not praying for a hero. She knows they're coming, and not one of them will ask her name. Not one will want to hear her side, until now. You linger at the edge of the temple's imagined columns, where sunlight slices through marble shadows and the salty Aegean breeze carries whispers of secrets too old for language. Here, in this charged stillness, the gods are always watching, or pretending not to. Athena, in particular, watches without blinking. You trace your mental footsteps back to Medusa, now fully human, breathtakingly mortal, and recently inducted as a priestess into Athena's sacred order. And not just any temple, mind you. The grand Parthenon-like temple at Sunion, built high on the cliffs, where sea meets sky and thunder likes to play tag with the waves. Imagine being a young woman confined to silence and celibacy in a structure that echoes your every breath, surrounded by cold stone and colder doctrine. Priestess life isn't easy. While Hollywood loves to picture high priestesses lounging in silk with incense curls rising around them, the reality's a little less glamorous. You wake up before dawn, bathe in freezing water, regardless of season, sweep marble floors with a reed broom that sheds like a molting cat, and prepare offerings for a goddess who never thanks you. Oh, and by the way, strict celibacy, no flirting, no winking, no dreams of marriage or motherhood. You belong to the goddess now. And for Medusa, who once giggled at fishmongers and flirted with hoplites on shore leave, this adjustment is monumental. But here's where it gets interesting. She adjusts, she thrives. Her beauty becomes almost an emblem of the temple itself, drawing more visitors than the sculpted reliefs. People start whispering that she has Athena's favor. Pilgrims leave more offerings when she's nearby. Even the old high priest starts clearing his throat a little louder when she walks in. Now, you might think Athena would be proud, her mortal representative inspiring such devotion. But remember, the Olympians aren't really into sharing attention, especially not with mortals. Especially not mortals who look like that. Here's your historical anchor. In ancient Athens, priestesses were often chosen from elite families, and many of them served not for life, but for set terms, often beginning in adolescence. Their virginity wasn't just spiritual, it was political. A chaste priestess meant a pure city. Her body wasn't hers. It was a symbol of civic virtue. So, if something were to tarnish that symbol, let's say, it wouldn't just be a personal tragedy. It would be a public disaster. And speaking of disasters, let's peek at Poseidon. You know, big guy with the trident, beard like a storm cloud, ego larger than the Mediterranean. He's got a bit of a complex when it comes to Athena. Lost the contest for Athens, remember. Her olive tree beat his saltwater fountain. Since then, he's been a little petty, maybe even vengeful. One myth tells of Poseidon visiting the temple not as a god, but disguised as a handsome sailor, rain-drenched and mysterious, the type who'd casually defeat a sea monster, then brood about it. Medusa, alone in the temple during her midnight watch, encounters him. Maybe she's intrigued. Maybe she's frightened. Maybe it's not as simple as either. Historians still argue whether this encounter was seduction, assault, or something in between, a murky moment in myth that's been scrubbed, rewritten, softened, hardened, and bent to suit every agenda from patriarchal control to feminist reclamation. What's clear is that Medusa, after that night, is no longer seen as pure. And in the temple of Athena, purity is everything. Here comes your fringe tidbit. Some very early versions of the myth, not widely shared, suggest it was Athena herself who set the trap, not to punish Medusa, but to bait Poseidon. You see, gods often battle, not through direct combat, but through symbols. And Medusa had become a symbol Athena didn't entirely control anymore. Whether it was a divine plan or a tragic misstep, what happens next is not Medusa's fault, but she pays the price. Athena appears not as a whisper, not as an omen, but in her full armor-clad glory. She does not rage, she doesn't scream. That would be almost merciful. Instead, she stares down at Medusa with cold, unblinking judgment, as if calculating what must be done to protect her image, her temple, and most importantly, her power. Then comes the curse. Hair that once fell like waves is transformed into writhing serpent speech, one whispering things only snakes and gods can hear. Skin turns pale, nearly translucent, almost statuary in its rigidity. And the eyes, those brilliant, expressive eyes, are made deadly. Anyone who meets her gaze will turn to stone. It's poetic in a bitter way. She who once drew all eyes now cannot meet a single one without killing. And in a final twist, Athena banishes her not just from the temple, but from human society. She is exiled to a remote island where no ship dares land and no shepherd drives his flock. The punishment is severe, but the real cruelty. There is no trial, no appeal, no gods to speak on her behalf. Not even Poseidon, who slinks away like a sea fog, vanishing before dawn. And so Medusa becomes something else entirely, not a woman, not a priestess, but a monster. Or rather, a monstered woman turned into the villain of her own story. As you lie there, listening to the soft rustle of your blanket and the hum of the fan, it's worth remembering. Monsters are rarely born. More often, they are made. You stand at the base of the Parthenon, light still filtering through the long broken columns, as if Athena's judgment lingers in the dust. Her presence hangs heavy, like a scent you can't identify, but can't ignore either. The marble under your feet hums, faintly, not literally, of course, but you swear you can feel the pulse of centuries echoing from below. This is where things really begin to unravel for poor Medusa. So far, she's lived a pretty standard life for a mortal priestess bias, silent, dutiful, celibate. But you're about to learn how that very vow of celibacy becomes her undoing. Not because she breaks it, mind you, but because someone else breaks it for her, and the punishment, all hers. Poseidon, god of the sea, is the sort of guy who'd definitely drive a sports car with no muffler if he lived in your neighborhood. Loud, boastful, a little too confident, and far too used to getting his way. You know that friend who never takes no for an answer when they want to crash your Friday night plans. That's Poseidon only. Instead of texting you 12 times, he turns himself into a crashing wave and materializes inside a sacred temple. Historians still argue whether Medusa had any prior connection to Poseidonsum. Say she may have once been a sea nymph, a daughter of sea deities, which would make the whole violation even more tangled. Others propose she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and that Poseidon simply saw something he wanted and took it. As you already suspect, ancient myths are rarely kind to women, especially not women trying to mind their own business. So there she is, inside the temple of Athena, sweeping the marble floor or laying fresh olive oil before the altar, when a sudden wind whips up. The air thickens with salt. Maybe she turns to run. Maybe she doesn't get the chance. What we do know, what nearly every version agrees upon, is that Poseidon forces himself upon her within Athena's sanctuary. And that's when things truly go to Hades. You'd think maybe Athena would be furious with Poseidon. After all, he desecrated her temple. But ancient deities have a twisted sense of justice. Instead, it's Medusa who takes the fall. Athena appears, not in a blaze of comforting light, but in a fury of betrayal. She doesn't ask what happened. She doesn't comfort her priestess. No, she curses her, turns her hair into a nest of hissing snakes, curses her with a gaze that petrifies any who dare look upon her. Not because Medusa sinned, but because she dared to be beautiful, dared to be desired in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Athena's logic: the temple has been sullied, so the object of Poseidon's desire must be made revolting, terrifying, untouchable. Now you might be asking, why would a goddess punish the victim? That's the question that makes this story so uncomfortable and so real. Historians, philosophers, and tired school teachers still debate Athena's motive. Was she protecting Medusa from future assaults by making her too deadly to approach? Was she outraged and unable to punish Poseidon directly, so she redirected her fury at the nearest mortal? Or was it simply the cold calculus of divine pride, where the temple's sanctity mattered more than a girl's life? There's a fringe theory you might like whispered about in late-night podcasts and speculative Reddit threads. Some believe Athena didn't curse Medusa as punishment, but as protection. By transforming her into a gorgon, she ensured no god or mortal could ever hurt her again. The snakes were her guardians. The petrifying gaze was her shield. A terrible gift, perhaps, but a gift nonetheless. Still, you have to wonder what it felt like to look in a polished bronze mirror and see your hair replaced with vipers. To know that even the people who once loved you, your sisters, your mother, your fellow temple maidens, could no longer look you in the eye without being turned to stone. To be forced into isolation, your life reduced to a mythic, cautionary tale. It's here, in this cruel transformation, that Medusa ceases to be a girl and becomes a monster. Not because she is monstrous, but because the world has decided she must be. Her beauty becomes her prison. Her body becomes a weapon. Her name, a curse mother's whisper to frighten disobedient children. And yet, somewhere inside that terrifying visage, the girl remains. The priestess who once lit candles beneath Athena's statue. The mortal who wanted only to serve, to be good, to be whole. Can you feel the shift in the air? The way her tragedy stains the marble, even after all these centuries. You take one last look around the ruins. The light has dimmed. The shadows are longer now, creeping toward the edges of your vision. And somewhere, faintly, you swear you hear the rustle of scales. You stand on a narrow path that winds along the Athenian cliffs, wind dragging threads of your cloak as the city breathes its complex truths around you. The year is somewhere around 460 BCE. You can smell olives and see brine, but the mood tonight is not gentle. Whispers travel faster than chariots, rumors of strange happenings at Athena's great temple. It starts with a girl named Medusa. Not a monster, not yet. Medusa serves as a priestess of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, war, and unwavering chastity. You imagine her as you walk, devoted figure draped in white, sweeping marble floors before sunrise, her dark curls tied back, eyes never meeting a man's too long. She has chosen, or perhaps been chosen for, a life without romance or touch, bound to the strict vows of purity that all priestesses of Athena must uphold. Break them, and you don't just disappoint the gods, you enrage them. The fringe tale begins on a night when Medusa lights candles for the evening rites. The flames flicker too violently and the marble beneath her trembles faintly. Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes, is watching her. You picture his gaze blinking, ancient, entitled. And if you believe the oldest versions of the myth, he doesn't wait for consent. In the hallowed temple of Athena, sacred ground, Medusa is violated. Historians still argue whether this story was always part of the canon, or if later poets, like Ovid, added it in to soften Medusa's future transformation. Regardless, it's become an inescapable version. Medusa, once mortal, is punished not for seduction, but for surviving something horrifying. In a place where the gods were meant to protect her. Here's the twisted knot. Athena doesn't punish Poseidon, she punishes Medusa. Now, you might want to scream into a throw pillow, totally fair. But to the ancient Greek mind, honor and purity were collective symbols, and Athena's temple had been defiled. In the logic of divine balance, someone had to pay. Poseidon, a major Olympian, held more power than Medusa ever could. The easier target was also the weaker one. The transformation isn't immediate. You feel it creep into Medusa's bones. Her breath shortens. Her reflection flickers wrong in a basin of water. Snakes stir where hair used to be, slowly at first, like ivy growing over a statue. And her eyes, they harden, not just because of Athena's curse, but because of a grief deeper than most can imagine, betrayal by both god and goddess. One fringe theory, passed through obscure Alexandrian scribes, suggests Medusa's transformation was not only punishment, but defense, a kind of divine trauma response, turning others to stone, a means to ensure no man would ever harm her again. You're not sure if that's comforting or just more tragic. Meanwhile, whispers in Athens grow. The story is murky, retold in candlelit corners and marketplace gossip. Some say Medusa sought power and was caught in a god's bed. Others blame her for the fall of a holy sanctuary. Few tell the version that makes you ache, that of a girl sacrificed for the pride of gods. And yet, Medusa does not beg. She does not return to Athena for mercy. Instead, she flees toward the dark cliffs of Libya. She will live there, or survive there, reshaped by fury and pain, exiled from humanity, but protected by fear. You lie there in bed, the weight of this injustice settling on your chest like a stone tablet. It's the kind of myth that doesn't give answers, only questions. Would Athena have acted differently if Medusa had been a man? Could Poseidon have ever been touched by consequence? Did anyone believe Medusa when she screamed? You listen to the wind now, and it sounds like a hiss. You find yourself walking through the dusty chambers of a temple long since abandoned. The stone walls still echo with the power of Athena's silence and Poseidon's storm. But now you're far from Greece. You're in Libya, ancient, sun-bleached, and vast. Here, Medusa has made her exile a kingdom. But it is not a kingdom of comfort. This is a realm of cliffs and caves, of broken gods and haunted winds. She hides deep within the Gorgets, a craggy stretch of terrain the Greeks once feared to map. Locals leave offerings at the edges, hoping not to see her, but to be spared. You picture her, no longer a girl, but something more ancient, elemental. Her hair has fully transformed, writhing, hissing vipers that sense danger before her eyes need to. Her gaze, once soft and curious, now calcifies flesh and bone with a single glance. And yet, she isn't hunting, she's hiding, waiting, surviving. Monsters in Greek mythology are rarely born, they're made, usually through the choices of others. And Medusa is not alone for long. Two other figures emerge from the myth's dark folds. They are not mortals, but immortal, sea demons, Gorgons. In some versions, they always existed. In others, they were transformed alongside her. Either way, the three become a strange kind of trinity: rage, sorrow, and vengeance. You can't help but think of them not as monsters, but as survivors clinging to each other on the fringes of a world that punished them for existing. But the world doesn't forget. Heroes will come. One in particular. His name is Perseus. You've heard of him, son of Dano and Zeus, slayer of monsters, rescuer of princesses. But before the hero's journey can begin, there must be a quest. And it comes from a cruel place. King Polydex wants to marry Dano, Perseus's mother. She refuses, so Polydex hatches a plan. He pretends to marry someone else and demands wedding gifts from all his subjects. Perseus, too poor to bring anything, boasts instead he'll fetch the head of Medusa, a head as a gift. It's a suicide mission dressed in honor, and Polydex knows it. But the gods intervene. Maybe they're bored. Maybe they feel guilty. Athena gives Perseus a polished bronze shield. Hermes offers winged sandals. Hades lends his helm of invisibility. Each tool a cheat code for a game he shouldn't survive. You sense something bitter here. The same goddess who cursed Medusa now helps orchestrate her death. And for what? A petty king's wedding, a mortal's pride, divine chess. And so Perseus sets out not to a battlefield, but to a woman's cave, to a place where fear has built a home. He is not cruel, not vengeful, but he is determined. The myths call him clever, brave, and yes, he is. But bravery, too, is sometimes just being willing to do what no one else dares, to look away while striking. He finds her at night. Perhaps she is sleeping. Perhaps she's already awake, snakes coiled around her, sensing fate. He does not look at her. He looks only at her reflection in the shield. A trick, a mirror, then steal through the dark. A single swing, silence, and it's done. He takes the head, the blood. But here's where things get strange again. From Medusa's neck, to beings emerge. Not entrails, not decay, life. Pegasus, the winged horse. Chrysor, the golden-sworded warrior. You lie still, in the dark, stunned. What does it mean for life to burst forth from death? From her suffering, to legends are born. Some believe they were Poseidon's children, sown in that brutal temple night and hidden within her until her death released them. If true, they are not just miracles. They are scars. You imagine Perseus holding the head, the snakes still writhing. Even in death, Medusa's power remains. Anyone who sees her eyes even now's turned to stone. She is feared. She is worshipped. She is used. And as Perseus flies home, trailing triumph and gore, you're left thinking of her cave empty now, except for the echoes of a woman who never asked for war but was made into a battlefield. Her name still survives, not as a victim, not even just as a monster, but as a warning. You take a moment to breathe in the briny air of ancient Greece, where mythology and mortal life intertwined like vines on an old stone column. You've walked with Medusa through temples and betrayals, and now your feet crunch softly on the marble floors of a sanctuary carved into the side of a hill, Athena's sanctuary. Not long after the terrifying transformation of Medusa, whispers began circling among the mortals and immortals alike. You think a woman turned into a snake-headed monster by a goddess would warrant more than whispers. But Olympus doesn't do accountability. Instead, Athena, brilliant strategist and stone-cold tactician, took a different route. She made Medusa useful. Yes, useful. You blink slowly. The chill in the sanctuary deepens. Athena, far from seeing Medusa as a victim, turned her into a divine weapon. Here's how. The goddess commissioned a shield, no ordinary bronze disc, mind you, but one etched with power and history. Into it, she placed the likeness of Medusa's cursed face, with eyes forever wide and snarling lips pulled back over monstrous fangs. The image of Medusa was burned into the surface of the Aegis. The shield became one of Athena's most iconic possessions. a symbol of both war and protection, and it terrified anyone who dared look upon it. Some scholars say this was Athena honoring Medusa's pain, giving her a kind of immortality. Others call it theft, repurposing of Medusa's trauma into a flashy war accessory. Historians still argue whether the aegis was a symbol of protection for women or a chilling reminder of divine punishment. One fringe theory even claims that the aegis wasn't merely a symbolic etching, but that it housed a fragment of Medusa's essence, which Athena could summon at will. Creepy. You lean forward, curiosity sparked, as you imagine Athena marching into battle with the image of the very woman she cursed emblazoned on her chest. That single quotes as ... bold, or hypocritical, or both. It's not the only place Medusa's image appears, either. Ancient Greek pottery, sculptures, jewelry, her face was plastered everywhere, like some twisted warning sign. You wonder, did these artists know the full story? Or did they just think snake hair looked cool? It's funny, isn't it? The woman who once turned heads with her beauty now stops hearts with her stare. The Gorgony on Medusa's face became a talisman. People hung it above doors, carved it into shields, painted it on urns. They believed it could ward off evil, like garlic for vampires, but significantly more stylish. It was the original security system. But here's the kicker. No one was asking why Medusa turned into a monster. No one was questioning what Poseidon did, or why Athena punished the victim. They just saw the horror and thought, yep, perfect for my temple door. You pause in the darkness, letting that realization sink in. Imagine being turned into a monster, and then having your face commercialized across an entire civilization. It's like being both the villain and the brand ambassador. You almost chuckle almost. And while Medusa lurked in her cave, isolated, feared, hunted, Athena paraded around with that infamous gaze strapped to her armor. Divine PR at its peak. One lesser-known tidbit. Some inscriptions describe temple rituals where priestesses would carry images of Medusa and chant prayers not to her, but to Athena, asking for her protection against enemies. So Medusa, once a mortal priestess devoted to the goddess, was now a cautionary tale in those same rituals. Talk about a demotion. You wonder if Medusa, tucked away in her stone garden, ever learned about this. Whether she knew that her face, her curse was now a symbol others wore for safety. Did it sting? Or did it give her some bitter sense of purpose? Athena's logic, if you can call it that, followed a strange divine pattern. Destroy, repurpose, glorify. It's a move the gods used more often than you'd expect. Turn a victim into a symbol, and no one asks too many questions. But not everyone was fooled. A few ancient philosophers hinted at an injustice behind the myth. Some argued that Medusa was never a monster, only a misunderstood force of nature. They proposed that her power to petrify wasn't a punishment, but a divine gift meant to protect her from future harm. A bit late, but you can see where they're going. You lean back, picturing Athena's shield catching the sunlight. The gleam of Medusa's frozen scream blinding enemies and friends alike. It's brilliant, in a dark way, like using a scar as a badge. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Athena, goddess of war and wisdom, bearing the face of a silenced woman on her armor. The message, maybe, I control even the monsters. Or maybe, more cynically, this is what happens when you cross the gods. Either way, it's a reminder, etched in bronze and stone, that Medusa would never again be seen as a woman. not by the world, and not by the goddess who cursed her. And just when you think things can't get messier, a young hero begins to make a name for himself. A golden boy with a magic sword, winged sandals, and a helmet that makes him invisible. Yep, you guessed it, Perseus is coming, but you're not ready to meet him just yet. There's still more to see in this world where gods decorate with trauma, and the line between weapon and woman gets blurry. The statues never blink. Even in your dreams now, you see them stone eyes, wide with terror, their mouths frozen mid-scream. You remember that fresco tucked deep in a ruined temple, the one with the women shielding their faces, their hair tangled in serpentine coils. And now you know, they weren't running from a monster, they were becoming one. You arrive at a dark turning point in Medusa's life. Day, her body began to betray her. The transformation wasn't instant. It crept like a shadow, first in whispers and glances, then in gasps and silence. Her once celebrated hair, thick, dark, and cascading, twitched one morning in the windless air. She touched it, confused, and felt scales under her fingers. You imagine her standing before a still pool of water, watching as a single strand slithered. You probably would have screamed. Medusa didn't. She simply stepped back and didn't look again. Ever. By then, Athena had vanished, offering no guidance, no explanation. Historians still argue whether the goddess's silence was out of shame, punishment, or fear of what she had done. The priestesses of the temple had long fled. Only one remained, a friend Medusa had known since she was a child. Her name was Eurydice, and she tried to help. But how do you comfort someone turning into legend? Eurydice brought herbs, ointments, even a blind oracle who claimed he had once seen Athena's regret. But nothing helped. As the days passed, Medusa's eyes began to glow faintly in moonlight. Her skin, once sun-kissed, took on a gray pallor. The final, irreversible change came in the form of a curse that would make her name eternal. She didn't know it at first, only that birds stopped chirping near her, that a deer once collapsed mid-step in her presence. But the confirmation came the day a pair of drunken soldiers broke into the ruins looking for treasure. They found her instead. They laughed until one turned to stone, mid-laugh, his mouth still parted in amusement. The other's scream froze forever in his throat, marble eyes bulging. Medusa didn't move. You can't help but picture her, not angry, not vengeful, just sad. Maybe even relieved that she didn't have to fight anymore, that her new form would finally protect her from further harm. Here's your historical fact. Greek temples, especially those two virgin goddesses like Athena, were often seen as inviolable sacred zones where no blood could be shed. But what happens when the gods themselves break that rule? Now, for a fringe tidbit, ancient Greeks believed snakes were symbols of rebirth and healing. Ironic, considering Medusa's hair now hissed with the weight of their writhing. And here's a whispered debate. Some scholars argue that Medusa's petrifying gaze wasn't a punishment, but a shield. Athena didn't curse her out of wrath but gave her power, terrible and absolute, so she would never be touched again. Regardless of its origin, the curse worked. Word of the soldier statues spread, mutating with each telling. The ruins were abandoned. Locals spoke of a spirit who walked among the columns with a head full of serpents, her face deadly, her sorrow deeper than stone. And in the hollow quiet of those empty halls, Medusa found not peace exactly, but stillness. You imagine her collecting the wildflowers growing between the cracks, feeding the snakes when they were restless, staring at the stars through slats in the broken roof, remembering a sky she used to love. They feared her now. The world she once belonged to, its temples, its gods, its lies, had turned its back. But at last, it left her alone. And that, oddly enough, was the first freedom she'd ever known. You walk with her now, through a ruined garden, where ivy chokes broken statues and moonlight spills like milk over shattered marble. The temple is silent, except for the whispering of snakes. Medusa sits in what was once the altar room, surrounded by ghosts in stone trespassers, warriors, priests, and perhaps, once, a friend who got too close. But something shifts this night, because now the world beyond the sea has begun to change. Rumors reach the Greek mainland, rumors of a cursed island in the west, where no one returns. Merchants speak of statues with screaming faces, of birds dropping from the sky. Hunters vanish. Sailors whisper the name with unease, Gorgo. Kings, you learn, don't fear curses. They see only opportunities. They send scouts, then champions. Men hungry for glory, who believe they can slay what they do not understand. And one day, a boy arrives, a demigod, the son of Zeus. His name is Perseus. You feel history holding its breath. Unlike others, he doesn't come alone. He bears gifts, a mirrored shield, winged sandals, a blade shaped by the gods, and a helmet of invisibility. You wonder, was he brave or merely armed? Medusa never sees him coming, not at first. She senses a presence, yes, like the shift in air before a storm. The snakes hiss, restless. She rises, stepping carefully among the stone forms of those who tried and failed. Her heart beats calmly now, not because she isn't afraid, but because she's tired of fearing. And then, movement, a reflection, a blur in polished bronze. She turns, too late. The blade sings once. They say she never screamed, that her eyes closed before the sword struck, that even the snakes fell silent. And when Perseus lifted her head by the hair, it still held power enough to petrify kings. What he didn't take was the rest of her. He didn't take her loneliness, her stolen voice, her years of exile. He didn't take the memory of temple bells, the sea breeze through olive trees, or the quiet ache of betrayal. He didn't take the girl, only the monster. The body remained where it fell, among those she never meant to harm. The garden grew over it. Wildflowers returned. And though the island would never know peace again, it remembered her differently. Animals came, birds nested, and on nights when the stars pulsed bright overhead, you could almost hear the wind speak her name, not in fear, but mourning. Here's your historical fact. Perseus was one of Greece's great heroes. His slaying of Medusa was celebrated in myth, art, and coin. He used her head to defeat sea monsters and tyrants. Here's the fringe detail. Some versions of the myth say Medusa gave birth as she died, her blood spilling onto the earth to form Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior. Life and death tangled together. And here's the unsaid thing. Even Athena kept Medusa's head afterward, affixed it to her shield as a warning, not to monsters, but to men. You pause, staring at the image. A woman's face, frozen in pain and rage, carried into battle like a trophy. What does it mean when the gods take the thing they once destroyed and make it their weapon? Maybe Medusa was never the villain. Maybe she was a mirror one that showed them their worst selves, and for that, they had to silence her. You walk away from the ruined garden. The wind shifts. the sea murmurs. Somewhere far away, the world is still celebrating Perseus. The bards sing of monsters slain and maidens saved, but none sing of the silence that followed the eerie stillness after her head was lifted. The sacred hush broken only by the wind rustling through vines and feathers. There's something heavy in your chest now. Not grief, not exactly. Something older. You begin to wonder, what if the real horror was never the monster? What if it was the story? Because this keeps happening. Not just with Medusa. Take Pandora. You walk with her now through time, through myth, to the moment she was shaped from clay. A gift from Zeus. Beautiful, perfect, cursed. They gave her a jar. Later, the poets would call it a box cleaner. Simpler, more poetic. And they said, don't open it. She wasn't curious at first, not really, but the jar hummed, whispered. Sometimes she swore it pulsed in her hands. And one day, in a moment that changed everything, she lifted the lid. Out came suffering, disease, war, envy, hunger, every agony the gods could fit inside a single vessel. They blamed her, of course. The men said she ruined paradise, that before Pandora, the world was golden, that her disobedience cursed mankind. But they never said who gave her the jar, or why the gods would hide such horrors and then hand them to someone innocent as a gift. No one asks, what did they expect her to do? You do, you ask, and the answer is as terrible as it is simple. They wanted her to fail. They built the trap, then wrote the story. And in that final moment, just before the lid slammed shut, something else slipped out. Hope, a fragile thing, quivering in the dark. Not enough to undo the damage, but enough to keep the world turning. You turn to her now, Pandora, standing among the wreckage of her own shame, cradling a jar she never wanted. You ask her what she thinks of it all. She says nothing, but her eyes tell you she is tired of being blamed, so you keep walking. Back through history's alleys, past Persephone, dragged into the underworld, past Icarus, who just wanted to fly, past Cassandra, cursed to speak the truth and never be believed. You see a pattern, 1,000 myths, all etched with the same blade. Women punished for curiosity, for desire, for daring to exist outside the mold. And always, the story is told the same way. She brought it upon herself. But maybe you've started to see through it. Maybe that's the real terror, the realization that mythology didn't just describe ancient beliefs, it shaped them, it hardened them. It told entire civilizations who deserved power and who deserved punishment, who was a hero and who was a warning. And the stories stuck. They're still sticking. Even now, thousands of years later, you hear echoes of Medusa in the headlines, of Pandora in political shame, of Cassandra in every ignored warning before disaster. Myths bleeding into reality. Culture dressed as destiny. And what about the monsters? You look back, truly look. Most of them weren't monsters at all. They were women made inconvenient, and instead of listening to their stories, we turned them into shadows, gorgons, sirens, harpies, witches, demons. Not real, we say, just symbols, just stories, but stories cut deepest. You walk into the next room. It's darker now, deeper, underground, and you realize you're not alone. They're here, the monsters, not screaming, not snarling, just watching, waiting. They know what you beginning to understand. The stories were never meant to protect you from them. They were meant to protect them from you. They surround you in silence, not with menace, but with memory. You see Echidna, the so-called mother of monsters, reclining in shadow. her lower half serpentine, her eyes older than language. They said she birthed horrors, Cerberus, the Chimera, the Hydra, but they never asked her why. No one wrote her side of it. Next to her, Lamia, once a queen, now a devourer of children. Zeus seduced her, Hera cursed her, and when grief shattered her mind, the poets turned her into a warning. They said she hunted innocence, but only because her own was stolen first. Behind them stands Scylla, frozen mid-transformation, a nymph once, until jealousy twisted her limbs into gnarled tentacles. She didn't choose the sea, she didn't choose the teeth, and yet sailors screamed her name like a storm. They are not stories, not to you, not anymore. They are the aftermaths of gods playing games. You begin to feel it, the weight of myth pressing against your ribs. Every tale you learned was a mirror with cracks, and through those cracks, the truth has been leaked, quiet, persistent, furious. You take another step, and the ground changes, no longer marble, but sand and wind and blood. You're in Troy now. The war is in its final hours. The horse already stands inside the gates, grinning with wooden teeth. But you're not looking at the warriors. You're watching Cassandra, daughter of Priam, priestess of Apollo, cursed with prophecy no one would believe. She screamed of fire, of betrayal, of death hidden in planks and shadows, and no one listened. They called her mad. Now, with smoke rising behind her, she kneels among the rubble, her hands stained with the truth no one wanted. The horror isn't that she was wrong. It's that she was right and silenced anyway. Your eyes meet hers. Across centuries, across disbelief. She does not weep, she waits, and you realize they all do. They wait for someone to tell their stories differently. Not with shame, not with blame, but with the dignity stolen from them by centuries of revision. Because that's the quiet revolution. Not swords, not spells, not fire or prophecy, but narrative. To change a myth is to resurrect a person, to breathe into the bones beneath the legend. You close your eyes, and you speak, not to summon, not to pray, but to remember. You name them: Medusa, Pandora, Lamia, Echidna, Scylla, Cassandra, and others whose names were lost, burned, rewritten, buried beneath temples. The air trembles because words are power, not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally. They bind, they curse, they liberate. The ancients knew that. That's why they feared poets as much as warriors. Why they made priests out of scribes. Why a name spoken aloud could awaken or destroy. And now the question isn't, were they monsters? The question is, who made them so? The answer is woven into the fabric of civilization. And if you pull that thread, the whole tapestry begins to unravel. You're not just walking through myth anymore. You're walking through history. Because behind every so-called monster was a woman who said no. No to gods, no to kings, no to roles forced upon her, and the punishment for that refusal. Immortality, with fangs and claws drawn on afterward. But here, in this deep chamber of memory, they look different, not monstrous, not broken, just unfinished, waiting to be seen. Again, truly seen for the first time. When your eyes open again, the chamber is gone. The sand, the smoke, the myth, they've folded themselves back into silence. You're standing now in a different space. The cold is sharper. The light has dimmed. It smells of parchment, ink, and centuries of suppression. A library, but not one you'd recognize. No dewy decimal, no comforting order, just shelves that twist into labyrinths, scrolls bound in leather, made from names you've forgotten, and voices whispering between cracks in the walls. Here, the gods are quiet, because this is a place not made by them, but about them. A place where men told stories about women and called it truth. You trace your hand along a crumbling volume. Its title is in ancient Greek, but you understand it, on the female nature, a warning to the virtuous. Inside are words spoken by philosophers, politicians, theologians all confident, all certain that women are weaker, smaller, more deceitful, more dangerous. One of the books crumbles at your touch, another hisses, a third begins to bleed. This is not metaphor. The knowledge stored here is alive, but it is poisoned. You understand now why so many myths end in silence. Medusa beheaded, Pandora blamed, Cassandra ignored, Andromeda chained, Iphigenia sacrificed, Antigone buried alive. You thought it was just myth, but it was doctrine. Every story told this way became law. A sword raised in a king's name, a pen signing away her rights, a ritual burning a woman who dared to heal, a whisper that turned fear into fire. And you walking here now begin to feel their weight pressing against your back until you hear it, breath, soft, ragged, beneath the silence. You follow it, past a corridor of broken masks, Athena's helmet, Hera's veil, Artemis's ball, shattered, each once a symbol, each now an echo. At the end is a single pedestal, and on it a mirror, no frame, no inscription, just your own reflection. But it isn't just you anymore. You see faces behind you, staring through the glass. Cassandra's hollow gaze, Medusa's steady fury, Echidna's tired knowing. They do not ask for pity, they do not need rescue, they demand reckoning, because the myths didn't kill them. We did, with every retelling that softened the violence, that stripped away the truth, that turned pain into poetry and called it entertainment. But now you remember. And memory is the most dangerous weapon of all. You look closer. The reflection ripples. Not your face, but another. She's familiar. You can't name her, but you feel her. Like a rhythm you once knew in your bones. She raises a finger to the glass and draws a single symbol. Omega, the end. But not a conclusion. A closing of one cycle, so another may begin. Because for every myth that dies, a new story waits to be born. And this time, it's yours to write. The glass doesn't shatter, it dissolves, as though it were never glass, at all, just memory made solid, just story made skin. Just the final veil between what was and what must be. And when it's gone, you are no longer in a library. You are not in a temple. You are not in a dream. You are standing in the middle of a modern city, but it feels unfamiliar, like someone rearranged history while you were gone. The streets echo with the clamor of 1,000 myths reborn. You see it first in the advertisements, a billboard of a fierce-eyed woman wielding a serpent staff, labeled Gorgon, Energy Unleash, the monster in you. Then in a graffiti mural, stretching across an alley wall, Medusa, not as victim, not as villain, but as witness. Around her, other women, Lamia, Scylla, Circe, all staring forward, not pleading for justice, but issuing a silent command. No one else seems to see it, or rather, they see through it, through her. And that's the most ancient myth of all, isn't it? That if you don't look at a woman directly, you don't have to answer to her pain. But here's the truth. She is everywhere now. You pass a bookstore. A young girl inside is reading Greek mythology aloud, but she stops halfway through a sentence about Persephone. She frowns, flips the page back, and says, "This doesn't sound right." She's not being precocious, she's remembering, because myth is never fixed, it breathes, and now it's breathing through her. A siren song cuts through the aeronaut from the sea, but from the open window of a car stopped at a traffic light. The woman driving it mouths along to lyrics you recognize, not because you've heard them before, but because they are myth-reworded, reshaped, reclaimed. You turn a corner and find a museum. It's quiet inside, but the exhibits are louder than ever. One room features shattered marble statues of gods. On the plaque, someone has scrawled in ink, "They were never immortal, only unaccountable." Another exhibit showcases ancient medical tools once used by midwives and herbalists. A small handwritten note beneath the glass reads, which was just a word for woman they couldn't control. You begin to notice something in the eyes of every woman you pass. Not just rage, not just grief, awakening, and not just women, everyone who's been cast as other, the ones turned into monsters, the ones rewritten as temptresses, harpies, sirens, tricksters, freaks. They are walking now not with fear, but with fire, and you are walking with them. You look down and realize your clothes are no longer what they were. You wear a patchwork garment made of pages torn from every story that tried to contain you. Threads of history, myth, blood, and bone. It is neither armor nor costume. It is truth made visible. And as you pass a mirrored window, your reflection catches you again. But this time, there are no others behind you. No goddesses, no monsters, no ancestors, because they are within you now. Their voices, their wounds, their wisdom alive in your marrow. You are not walking in their footsteps anymore. You are walking with them at your side. And with every step, the myth rewrites itself. She was not too loud. She was not too much. She was not too wild. She was not too angry. She was not too soft. She was never wrong to want more. Because what they called madness was memory. What they called defiance was dignity. What they called monstrous was just magnificent. And now, as the sun sets on a city reborn, you understand this is not the end. This is the middle of the story. And for the first time in a very long time, you are the author. The night arrives quietly, not with thunder, not with violence, just a hush, like the whole world is waiting for breath, for reckoning, for the next line of the story. You walk beneath stars that feel closer now, not distant lights, but witnesses. Each one a soul who once dared to remember something others wanted forgotten. Ahead of you, the street becomes a bridge. It stretches into mist, suspended over something you can't name. Beneath its shadows, voices, echoes of past selves that once begged for silence. You keep walking. The bridge isn't made of steel or stone. It's made of names. Names you were never taught. Names that were once whispered, hidden, buried. Names of the women burned, the prophets ridiculed, the lovers erased, the daughters uncounted. Each plank is carved with a truth. She spoke even when her voice shook. They called her monster, but she was mirror. He wore his softness like armor. They survived. That was the magic. You feel the weight of every step, but you also feel the wind lifting your feet. It's as though the bridge wants you to cross, because on the other side, something waits. Not a destination, not a paradise, but a question. When you reach the end, it stands there, tall and dark and shining like obsidian, a door. No walls, just the door itself, standing alone in the mist, ancient and pulsing with light that doesn't blink. There's no handle, no sign, only an inscription carved across its surface. You do not enter to be someone else. You enter to remember who you were before the forgetting. The wind stills. The stars blink. The city behind you holds its breath, and you reach out, not because you know what's beyond, but because you no longer fear the not knowing. Your fingers touch the door, and it shimmers, not gold, not silver, something older, something like the color of voice, a shade that shifts with every memory that lives inside you. The door does not open, it melts, and you step through, into everything. A forest, a cave, a home, a void, a cathedral made of ribs, a galaxy curled inside a child's eye. Your mother's laugh before she was tired, your own hands unashamed, the fire where witches danced and no one burned. The first story you ever told before you knew how to lie. This is not heaven, this is remembrance, and here the rules are different. Time doesn't move, it listens, and every scar on your body becomes a line in a poem the stars recite for you alone. You walk until you arrive at a circle. 12 figures sit around it, waiting. Some look like goddesses, some like monsters, some like no one you've ever seen before. They are not here to judge, they are here to witness. One gestures for you to sit, and then nothing. No questions, no demands, no rituals, just silence. And in that silence, a truth settles inside you. The myths were never dead, they were only interrupted by those who feared what remembering might awaken. But here, in this place, beyond forgetting, you can feel them again beating in your chest, coiled in your breath, rising like wings beneath your ribs, and you realize you didn't come here to change the story. You came to continue it, to speak the lines that were left unsaid, to honor the names that were never spoken, to make the space for every truth denied, because you are not the end of the story. You are the voice that says, "Let me tell you what really happened." And this time, they will listen. The circle breathes with you. The 12 figures do not speak. They don't need to. Each carries a presence, heavy as history, but not crushing. Their eyes don't pierce, they invite, and without words, you understand, they are not gods, not judges, not even ancestors in the usual sense. They are keepers of memory, of myth, of every truth edited out of the version you were told. One leans forward. Their skin is weathered bark, their eyes twin embers. They place a hand on the ground, and it ripples like water. From that ripple, a vision rises. It's a classroom, flickering and familiar. You are there years younger, frightened, small. A teacher stands at the front, reading from a textbook, and you see it now, clearly. The lies that were planted early, like seeds in soft soil. They were savages before we civilized them. She was burned because she consorted with the devil. Empires fall because they're weak. Truth is what survives. You, the child in the vision, absorb it all, nods, accepts, never questions. But you, here in the circle, do question now. And as the vision fades, one of the keepers speaks not aloud, but into your chest. Every story you were taught had a cage hidden inside. The second keeper rises. Their body is made of broken statues, marble skins stitched with gold. They walk toward you and offer a small, glowing object, a mirror, not ordinary, not flattering. This mirror reflects not your face, but your silences, moments you should have spoken, times you knew the truth but swallowed it. Instances when a lie survived because your voice didn't. You flinch, but you don't turn away. You take the mirror, and the keeper nods. This is what they've waited for. Not obedience, not perfection, just willingness to look, to hold, to bear the weight of knowing, and still move forward. Another ripple, another vision. This time, it's not your memory. It's the memory of the world. The door you walked through unlocked something ancient, collective. You're now inside the library of all things forgotten. You see a woman in Babylon carving poems on clay tablets by candlelight. Her name lost when her city fell. A child in Mali whispering proverbs that shaped a kingdom. Her words carried by griots long after her bones turned to dust. A rebel in the Andes painting warnings in blood on cave walls before the conquistadors arrived. A mother in Poland hiding forbidden lullabies in embroidery so her daughter could remember who she was under occupation. A dying man in a New York hospital whispering his partner's name when the nurses refused to write it down. Each one forgotten by history, remembered now because you're here. And they were never just victims of time. They were authors. They shaped the currents beneath every empire's boat. You are trembling, not in fear, but in awe, because suddenly everything is connected. The myths, the wars, the silence, the songs they braid together. And at the heart of the braid, you find a single truth pulsing like a drumbeat. Nothing ever truly disappears. It only waits for the right voice to return, and that voice is now yours. The 12th figure, cloaked in shadow and stars, raises a hand and points to a path behind you. It wasn't there before. Now it waits lush, overgrown, shimmering like memory. You know what it means. The circle was never your destination. It was your initiation. You rise. The mirror still warm in your hands. The names you've heard now stitched into your spine. And though you are the same, something is different. You carry the silence of generations. But more than that, you carry the power to break it. As you step onto the path, the circle behind you sings not with sound, but with recognition. You do not walk away. You walk back into the world that forgot. But this time, you remember, and you are ready to remind others. You walk through a corridor of impossible foliage, vines like braided hair, trees that shimmer with ink-dark bark, leaves with veins of copper and eyes of glass. The path breathes beneath your feet, as if the land recognizes your presence not as an intruder, but as something long-waited. This is not metaphor, this is memory, made tangible. With each step forward, you are stepping backward through layers of forgotten truth, unrevised history, and buried pain. The first clearing reveals a statue. At first glance, its broken head missing, one arm gone, moss growing through its cracks. But as you approach, the cracks rearrange. The stone begins to move, not to speak, but to become. And you understand, this is not a monument to a hero. It is a warning. Every statue is a version of history that someone paid for. Every missing head is a silence someone forced. You look into the hollow space where the face once was, and, for a moment, your own face flickers there. Because who among us hasn't carved a version of events that made us look better than we were? You keep walking. A wind picks up, not cold, not warm, just true. It carries the smell of old paper, sweat, metal, ink, rain-soaked revolution. It carries stories. And then you find it, the table of unwritten names, a single slab of obsidian, no carvings. No inscriptions, just absence, the names that should have filled history books, carved onto buildings, spoken in classrooms, remembered in holidays. You run your hand along its smooth surface, and it shivers. One by one, names appear, not just letters, but lives. Farida al-Spera, who translated texts under threat of death, so knowledge wouldn't die in the flames of war. Makoto Ishida, who carved subversive messages into the soles of prisoners' shoes. Abuela Rosa, who taught for generations to speak their true language in secret, passing culture like smuggled gold. Noor, a street performer in 14th century Damascus, whose parables mocked the caliph to his face and whose name was erased after his execution. Kofi, a slave boy who taught himself to read by watching the lips of others, and whose journal was buried under a plantation for 200 years. Each name appears, each one a thunderclap, each one an accusation against forgetting. You sit at the table, not because you deserve to, but because you now know that silence was never neutral, it was always chosen. And now, so is remembrance. The table doesn't ask you to weep, it asks you to write. So you do, not with pen or stylus, but with presence. By simply witnessing, you make them real again. Every generation needs someone to hold memory in their mouth like bread. Someone to say, I didn't know you before, but I carry you now. And as you trace your fingers over their names, a voice behind you whispers, what will your name mean when it's spoken by the forgotten? You turn. No one is there. Or maybe everyone is. You rise once again. This time, lighter not, because the weight is gone, but because you are stronger, carried by those who came before you, changed by those who were denied their place. A gate appears, not grand or gilded, just a simple wooden door, cracked and mossy. You step through, and you are back. The world around you hasn't changed. The noise still roars, the systems still spin, the books still lie, the statues still stand. But you have changed. Now you see the hidden layers. Now you hear the voices beneath the silence. Now you carry a mirror, a table, a circle, and 1,000 names in your chest. You don't walk the same, because you no longer move through the world to consume it. You move through it to repair it, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a witness, a keeper, a rememberer. And in a world trained to forget, you return to your own time like a diver, rising from deep water lungs, tight vision, sharp ears, still ringing from the pressure of the depths. But now you see, not just the surface of things, but the fractures beneath them. You see how cities are shaped like wounds, dressed in glass and steel. You see how history books whisper the names of kings, while screaming over the voices they silenced. You see how justice was always unfinished, always delayed, always asked to wait until the powerful were comfortable. And you see yourself no longer just a passenger, no longer neutral. You walk past a museum now and notice which walls are bare, which cultures are footnotes, which wars are glorified, and which genocides are unnamed. You walk into your classroom, your home, your meeting, your memory, and realize they are all built on choices someone made to remember this and forget that. And you are now one of the choosers. This knowing is not easy. It is heavy, jagged, and permanent, but you no longer fear that weight, because you have walked through fire. You have heard the stories that were never meant to reach you. You have sat at the table of the unwritten names. You have listened to the rage, the grief, the defiance of the forgotten. And now their breath is in your lungs. You were not changed by swords or banners or royal decrees. You were changed by truth, raw, unpolished, inconvenient. And now, when someone tells you "That's just the way it was," you will answer. "No, that's just the way you were allowed to remember it." And when someone says, "You can't change the past," you'll whisper, "But I can change what it costs to forget it." Because history is not just what happened, it's what survived. And now you are one of its guardians. So walk forward through this world that still sleeps in curated memory, not to shake the world awake with noise, but to whisper truth into the quiet corners, to plant stories like seeds, to break open the monuments of comfort and pour light into their cracks. One day, someone may ask what you did with what you learned. What will you say? Will you point to the statues you tore down, or the lives you chose to build up? Will you list the lies you exposed, or the truths you protected? You may never be famous. Your name might never be etched in stone. But if one forgotten soul is remembered because of you, if one erased voice is heard again through your own, then your name has already entered the circle, and that is enough. Let the world forget the kings. Let it remember the keepers. You are one now. Welcome home. You sit before a marble pedestal. Upon it, a bronze shield, ancient and battered. The reflection it casts is not yours, but hers. Not the snarling face chiseled on Roman coins, not the wide-eyed terror painted by Baroque hands, but the gaze of a woman wronged and rising. They once used her face to strike fear into enemies etched on armor, carved into temples, a symbol of death, of threat. Her power was weaponized, stolen, and sold as protection for men. Even Perseus used her head, not her name. But her story has not ended there. She slipped through the centuries, hidden in the corners of cathedrals and codices, surviving in the margins of myth until now. Now she returns, not as a beast to be slain, but as a banner lifted. Modern voices reclaimed her. Feminists held her up, not as a monster, but as a mirror of rage, unspoken, of pain ignored, of survival reinterpreted. She is protest, she is power, she is the fury of those never believed. They tried to bury her with silence, but she became an echo that never fades. And tonight, you hear her again clearer than ever. She was never theirs to use. She is still speaking. Will you finally listen? You walk into the museum alone. The silence here is reverent, the air thick with the weight of canvas and varnish. Marble echoes follow your steps until you stop before a gilded frame. A painting, massive, violent, celebrated. Perseus stands triumphant, arm raised, sword in one hand, and her severed head in the other. Her eyes are still open, her mouth still parted. Her hair, those serpents that once hissed in warning, are frozen mid-writhing, silent now, tamed. The plaque beside the piece reads Medusa, slain by Perseus, artist, Caravaggio, date 1597. Tourists whisper reverently, "You don't." You stare at her face, not his glory. The oil glistens like fresh blood, and beneath the dramatic chiaroscuro, you see something no one mentions. Terror. She is not monstrous here, not truly. Her brows are knit in agony, not rage. Her face is soft, not scaled. Her lips trembling, not snarling. She is not myth. She is a woman. Unknowingly revealed something sacred. The horror of being silenced while alive, then distorted in death. You pass other paintings. In Rubens' version, Perseus holds the head like a prize at auction, his sword still dripping, his gaze noble, hers lifeless. In Cellini's famous statue, he's poised in bronze, holding her like a hunter posing over a fresh kill. She is twisted, limp, and yet somehow the center of it all. Always the centerpiece, never the voice. The artists, you realize, were not just painters. They were editors of a story they didn't understand or didn't care to. They painted her not as a victim, but as a spectacle, an it, not a she, a necessary evil to highlight the hero's virtue. But the truth lies in the brushstrokes they tried to hide, in the tear that glistens just below her left eye, in the way her mouth doesn't scream it pleads, in the silence where her story should have been. She appears in countless images. In medieval bestiaries, she is depicted more serpent than human fangs, and forked tongue and all, a warning against women's deception. In Renaissance tapestries, she is rendered as a temptress luring, breasts exposed, danger wrapped in sensuality. In romantic engravings, she's frozen at the moment of decapitation, forever caught in the instant of her undoing. And yet, in all of them, something vital is always missing, her side. No painting shows her before Athena's temple, before Poseidon, before the gods' abandonment. No brush captured the fear as her feet slid on marble, her cries echoing unanswered. No palette rendered the trembling of her hands as divine wrath twisted her limbs, her hair, her fate. No portrait shows the cost of survival when survival itself becomes the crime. And still some dared to look closer. In the 20th century, her image shifts. Artists begin to paint her as a woman, becoming not as one destroyed. Feminist painters use her form not to show her death, but her awakening. Her snakes, once signs of curse, become a crown. Her eyes, instead of luring men to stone, look past them toward the future. Some depict her not with Gorgon features, but fully human, standing alone on a cliff, wind in her hair, chin raised, no Perseus in sight, no sword, no savior. Others place her in mirrors, letting the viewer become the reflection. A quiet indictment. What do you see when you see her? Some artists paint only the snakes, dozens of them. Tangled and alive, each one a story untold, a scream unheard, a survival uncelebrated. You turn a corner and stop again. Here, on a small canvas, almost overlooked, is a painting unlike the rest. No hero, no decapitation, no blood, just her sitting. She is older than the myths ever allow. Her gaze is tired but sharp. Her hands are clasped gently in her lap. The snakes drape over her shoulders like shawls, not chains. She is not cursing, not luring, not punishing. She is remembering. You sit down in front of her. Minutes pass, then more, and finally you understand. The paintings twisted her because they couldn't handle her truth. Because myth is easier to consume when you can flatten it, control it, frame it. But this woman, they couldn't capture her fully. Not in marble, not in oil, not in any language shaped by the victors. She doesn't fit into borders or brushstrokes. Her grief spilled past the edges of every frame they built for her. And as you rise to leave, you feel her eyes following you, not in warning, but in witness. She is not trapped in those paintings. She has always been more than what they made of her. She has outlived her slayers. She has outlasted their stories. And she's not done yet. You find yourself walking beneath vaulted ceilings in a museum, your footsteps softened by hushed reverence and distant echoes of tour guides. The walls around you shimmer with frames, brushstrokes, marble, and myth. But you're not looking for gods or warriors today. You are hunting snakes, not the real ones, of course, but the ones twined through her hair, living serpents in oil and clay, etched into time, Medusa. She follows you. From the broken lips of a red figure crater in Athens, she stares. A face once human, now contorted jaw, agape, in eternal scream. The snakes writhe around her head, like thoughts too loud to silence, like pain too sharp to cage. Move forward a few centuries, and you find her again, on a Renaissance shield, polished like a mirror. Her eyes are wide and rolling in horror, her lips frozen in anguish, her decapitated head bleeding, glorified, a trophy of war, a story rewritten by the victors. They never painted her before the curse, never when she prayed, never when she loved, only when she became dangerous, only when she could be used. Her suffering became art, her silence decoration, a token of male victory. But she lives in more than galleries. Step outside. She's tattooed on the shoulder of a young woman who's been through hell and survived it. A Medusa facing out, guarding her back, her pain inked, her power worn. A quiet scream in black and gray. Another man passes, wearing a jacket with her face on the back. He doesn't know the whole story. He just thinks it looks cool. He likes the edge, the myth, the monster. But the meaning was never meant for him. Medusa has slipped into the hands of those who understand what it means to be feared for existing, silenced for surviving. On a subway wall, she's graffitied in pink and gold. She warned you, the message reads. On a sticker pasted to a protest sign. Her eyes, crying blood, above the words, I said no. In silence, in symbols, in shadow she endures. You begin to understand. The snakes were never a curse. They were a crown. Wild, writhing, untamable. A living halo for a woman destroyed and reborn. They made her hair the horror. But it was the gods who brought the pain. It was the mortals who turned her name into a warning. So she took their curse and wore it, not as punishment, but as a mark of power. Even now, her gaze lingers. In every woman who refuses to smile when told to. In every survivor who reclaims her story. In every scar that has become armor. Snake hair, yes, but suffering that spoke and kept speaking. And now so do you. You return to the place where it all began. Not in real time. There are no ferries to ancient Greece. No temples unmarred by centuries. But in your mind, you see the worn steps again, carved into the cliffside. Wind lashes at your face. The sea below churns with secrets, as if Poseidon himself still sulks in the deep. This is the temple of Athena, high above the waters, once proud and white and echoing with prayers. Now it is crumbling. But you walk the path again not as a tourist, not as a scholar, but as a witness, retracing the scene of a crime, the place where a priestess was betrayed, not by her faith, but by the gods who claimed to protect her. Medusa once knelt here. You can almost hear her breathing, her robes whispering across the stones, her offerings laid gently at Athena's feet. You see her eyes closed, lips moving in silent devotion. She was not a warrior then, not a monster, not a warning. She was a girl, whole, unbroken. And then came the sea god. You do not need to re-watch the violence. You've read enough. You've seen what the poets dared not say, what the painters turned away from, what was framed as taken, as claimed, as ravished, when in truth it was assault. What happened in that temple wasn't passion, it wasn't fate, it was cruelty. Poseidon left untouched, smirking, perhaps, in the stories not told. A god whose power shielded him from consequence. And Athena, the protector, she didn't extend a hand. Instead, The punishment fell on the woman left, bleeding on the floor. You look again at the stone beneath your feet. This is where it began. The transformation. Not a gift, not a curse. A sentence. Snakes for hair, eyes that kill, skin that no one could touch. But Medusa never asked for vengeance. She asked to be heard, protected, believed. And when the gods failed her, when justice rotted on the altar, she became her own defense, her own temple. You walk deeper into the ruins. Dust coats your hands. Each step feels like an echo. You wonder, what if Athena had embraced her? What if the goddess had stood before the trembling girl and whispered, "I believe you," instead of turning her into a symbol of fear? Would the myths be different? Would Medusa's name mean healing instead of horror? Perhaps not. The old gods were never built for justice, but that's why you came back here. To rewrite the myth, not in marble, but in memory. Because something else happened on these temple steps. After the screams, after the silence, Medusa stood. She rose, cracked and trembling, but breathing. She gathered what remained of herself and walked away, not as a victim, but as a survivor. She did not become a monster that day. She became untouchable. And while they told her story in hushed warnings and violent ends, she kept living out of sight, but not erased. You touch the wall, cool and ancient. This place tried to bury her, but the truth echoes louder now. She didn't die in the temple. She became it. And so you leave stone in your pocket, wind in your hair, carrying her with you. A memory, a warning, a witness. You were told she was terrifying, that her hair writhed with serpents, that her glare turned men to stone. You were warned not to look her in the eye, not because she was misunderstood, but because she was monstrous, dangerous, a thing to be defeated. But now you know the truth. She was never a monster. She was made into one, not by her own hand, nor her own heart, but by the world that refused to accept her pain, a world that silenced her suffering with symbols and turned her survival into spectacle. Medusa, they say, was cursed, but that word curses, too simple, too neat. It places blame on her when the blame belonged elsewhere. It wasn't her stare that was fatal. It was the gaze cast upon her body, the gaze that decided she had no right to rage, no right to defend, no right to reshape the narrative. Because when she finally had the power to protect herself, to end the cycle, she was called unnatural, unholy, unforgivable. She was never a monster. But the men who feared her made her into one so they could sleep at night. You think about how easy it is for a woman to be painted monstrous when she refuses to bow, when she doesn't soften her anger, when she wears her scars on her face instead of hiding them beneath layers of compliance. They call that dangerous. But what's more dangerous is a world that teaches women that suffering in silence is sacred, that being devoured is divine. Medusa looked back. She didn't shrink. She met the eyes of a world that violated her, and the world blinked. They told that story as a warning, but it was never a warning. It was a revolution. She didn't destroy indiscriminately. She didn't roam the earth, turning people to stone out of pleasure. She lived in isolation. She withdrew from a world that told her she was nothing. And even then, they came for her. Even then, they sent heroes. Perseus, the golden boy of Olympus, wielding a polished shield and a blade blessed by the gods. A man sent not to avenge, but to silence. And still, they tell his story as triumph. But look closer. A boy with divine gifts, armed by gods, against a woman who had already lost everything, and still frightened them. She had no army, no temple, No favor, only power born from pain and the determination never to be touched again. You see now why they feared her. Not because she was hideous, but because she was whole. Because she made herself untouchable in a world that only respected women when they were broken. So they took her head, mounted it on a shield. Even in death, she was turned into a weapon, wielded by others. Not remembered, not honored, just used. But still, her power endured. Still, her story survived the erasures, the rewritings, the moralizing myths. And in the cracks of the marble, in the silence between the stanzas, you find her, alive. Not the monster in their stories, but the truth behind their fear. A girl who became her own salvation. A woman who refused to bow. A myth they could not kill. And so now, when you think of Medusa, you don't picture a snarling beast in a cave. You see her before the transformation, yes, but more than that, you see her after. You see her standing tall. You see the way her snakes hiss, not in fury, but in warning. Do not touch what you cannot hold. You see her eyes not as weapons, but as mirrors, reflecting back all that the world projected onto her. And in that mirror, perhaps you see yourself, your own anger, your own defiance, your own scars and shields. You carry her now on a shield, but in your voice, because you've walked through the myths, you've uncoiled the lies, and you've found her there, waiting not for a hero, but for a witness, someone to tell the story right. And you will, because she was never a monster. She was a monument. This completes the final section of your 25-part narrative on Medusa. Would you like a closing summary, an epilogue, or visual illustration prompts for Copilot based on the full story? The silence after a storm often holds more truth than the storm itself. You sit with her now, far from temples, swords, and paintings, far from the centuries of fear she never asked for. Her eyes no longer turn flesh to stone. They simply see, and they are tired. Not with vengeance, but with the weight of a world that never asked who she was before she bled. In this space beyond myth and marble, she speaks without words. The quiet between your breaths tells her story. A girl who prayed for protection and was punished for it. A sister whose temple became a crime scene. A symbol reshaped by the powerful, again and again, until she could no longer recognize herself in the mirrors of time. You understand now. She was never a monster. She was made into one, because it was easier. Easier to fear her than to face what was done to her. Easier to raise swords than to ask questions. Easier to call her cursed than to call out injustice. But stories, like stones, can be broken open. And in their shattered pieces, we can find truth raw and unpolished. You see her not as Gorgon, not as myth, but as memory. A warning, yes, but not of danger. A warning of silence. Of the silence that follows violence. Of the silence that wraps itself around victims and makes them disappear. She never wanted revenge, only to be heard, only to be seen as she truly was. And now, in this final moment, you listen. You hold her gaze not to freeze, but to witness, not to judge, but to understand. In that stillness, the legends fall away, the snakes quiet, the stone cracks. And what's left is a girl with eyes like oceans, waiting not for heroes or horror, but for peace. For the first time in millennia, she is not feared, she is remembered, not as a monster, but as Medusa. A woman wronged, misunderstood,